The orc girl accused me after I saved her life. I never expected her next words. The morning Marcus nearly walked past a dying woman started the same way every bad morning starts. Late, already behind, already counting the minutes he did not have. He had set his alarm for 5:45. He woke at 6:22. His phone was showing 3 missed calls from his supervisor, Carl, and 1 from a number he did not recognize. He ignored all of them, pulled on his jacket, grabbed his keys, and got out the door before his brain had fully caught up with his body. Marcus was 31 years old. He managed the floor at a mid-sized warehouse on the east side of the city. It was not a glamorous job. It was not a job he had dreamed about as a child. But it paid consistently. It required him to be somewhere every morning, and it gave him a reason to get out of bed even on the days when he did not particularly want to. For Marcus, that was enough. He was the kind of man people described as quiet, not shy, not cold, just quiet. He spoke when he had something to say and went silent when he did not, which made him easy to overlook in crowds and difficult to read in conversations. His coworkers liked him well enough but did not know him well. His neighbors waved from their driveways but had never been inside his apartment. His sister, Diane, called him every Sunday and complained that he never called first. He was not a complicated man. He had simply learned, over the years, that keeping a careful distance from other people's problems was the cleanest way to live. He believed that. He had built a life around it. He was cutting through the underpass on East 9th Street when he saw her. She was on the ground, face down. Her cheek was pressed against the concrete and her arms were at her sides, not braced beneath her the way they would be if she had chosen to lie down. Her legs were at a slight angle, like she had dropped mid-step. A worn canvas backpack had slid off one shoulder and sat beside her, partially open. Marcus stopped. He was 40 feet away. He looked at her. He looked at the time on his phone. He was already 28 minutes late, and the warehouse was 12 more minutes from where he stood. He told himself she was probably sleeping. People slept in that underpass. It was sheltered from wind, shaded in the mornings, and far enough from the main road that police did not circle through often. He had walked past sleeping people in that underpass before. It was not unusual. It was not his business. He kept walking. He made it 3 steps. He stopped again. Something in his chest would not let him keep moving. He could not name it. It was not courage. It did not feel like courage. It felt closer to the specific discomfort of almost doing something wrong and knowing it before you finished doing it. He turned around. He crossed the 40 feet in about 8 seconds and crouched down beside her. Up close, she looked younger than he expected. She was a young woman, maybe mid-20s, with dark skin and natural hair that had come loose from whatever had been holding it. She was breathing. He could see that. But her breathing was shallow and uneven, and when he gently touched her shoulder and said hello, she did not respond. He called for help. Within a minute, a man walking his dog on the far side of the street came over. Marcus told him to stay with her while he called for emergency services. He made the call, gave the location, described what he was seeing. The dispatcher asked if she was breathing. He said yes, but barely. The dispatcher told him not to move her and to stay on the line. He stayed on the line. He stayed until the ambulance arrived, which took 6 minutes. He watched the paramedics work quickly and professionally. One of them went through the contents of her backpack, looking for identification or any medical information. They found a small card tucked into a side pocket, a medical alert card. It said she had type 1 diabetes and listed an emergency contact number. One of the paramedics looked up at Marcus and said she was having a severe low blood sugar episode. He said she would be okay. They loaded her onto a stretcher. Marcus gave his name to no one. He had not thought to. He was not looking for recognition or gratitude. He answered a few questions from the paramedics about what he had observed when he found her, and then he stepped back and watched the ambulance leave. He stood in the underpass alone for a moment. Then he walked to work, 41 minutes late, and said nothing to anyone about what had happened. Carl gave him a look when he walked in. Marcus said his bus had been delayed. Carl did not believe him but did not push it. The morning moved on the way mornings do at a warehouse. Loud, repetitive, and consuming enough that there is not much room left for thinking about anything else. By midday, Marcus had nearly stopped thinking about the woman entirely. Nearly. The thought would come back in small moments. During lunch, when he was sitting alone at the break room table. During the afternoon, when the work slowed down and his hands were busy but his mind was not. He wondered if she was all right. He wondered who the emergency contact was. He wondered if anyone had come for her. He did not wonder long. Wondering about strangers was a habit he had never allowed himself to develop, because wondering led to caring, and caring led to being involved in things that were not his problem. He drove home at 5:30. He made rice and chicken. He watched something on his laptop. He went asleep. He did not think about her again. Or at least he tried not to. That night, lying in the dark, the image came back to him without permission. Not her face exactly. The angle of her legs. The way the backpack had slid off her shoulder. The sound her breathing had made when he crouched beside her, shallow and wrong and fragile in a way that living people's breathing should not sound. He turned over and closed his eyes. She was fine. The paramedic had said she would be fine. He had done the right thing. He had turned around. He had stayed. He had called for help and waited until that help arrived. That was all he could have done. That was more than a lot of people would have done. He had done enough. He told himself this until he fell asleep. What he did not know, lying in that dark apartment with the city noise filtering through his window, was that the woman on the concrete was about to find him, not to thank him, to accuse him. And that when she walked into his workplace 3 days later with her jaw set like a closed door, and her eyes sharp enough to cut glass, the version of Marcus who believed in keeping careful distances from other people's problems, was about to meet a situation he was completely unprepared for. He had turned around once. He was about to find out what that cost. Because nothing that happened next was what either of them expected. Not the accusation, not the investigation that followed it, not the silence that settled over his name like dust over something left out too long, not the discovery that changed everything, and not her next words, the one she said standing beside the loading dock on a Tuesday afternoon with no audience and no script, the words that landed in his chest like something dropped from a height. None of it was what he expected. None of it was what she expected either. And that, more than anything else, is what makes this story worth telling. Her name was Nadia. She was 24 years old. She had been born in a city she barely remembered to a mother she remembered too well, and she had spent most of her adult life learning how to need as few people as possible. She was good at it. She had made it into a kind of skill, the way some people are skilled at cooking or languages or reading a room. Nadia was skilled at being self-sufficient, at requiring nothing from strangers, at keeping her dependencies small and manageable and entirely within her own control. Her diabetes was the one thing that refused to cooperate with that system. She had been diagnosed at 16. Her mother had taken the news the way she took most difficult news, which was to absorb it in silence, rearrange her entire schedule around it, and never mention it again unless it was absolutely necessary. Nadia had done the same. She monitored her levels. She carried supplies. She knew her body's warning signs. She had built an entire daily routine around the management of something that could, if she was not careful, put her on the ground in an underpass on East 9th Street while a stranger called for help, and she was not even conscious enough to know about it. That morning had been a cascade of small failures. She had been out late the night before, working a second shift at the restaurant where she waited tables on weekends to supplement the income from her main job at a printing company. She had been tired when she came home. She had eaten something small and gone to sleep without checking her levels properly. She had woken in the early morning already feeling unsteady but had told herself it would pass. She had gotten dressed. She had left her apartment. She had not made it to the corner of East Ninth. The next thing she remembered was the ceiling of a hospital room, white and institutional and very bright, with a nurse beside her explaining what had happened in the careful, slightly slowed-down voice that medical staff use when they are not sure how much the patient is following. Nadia followed all of it. She was sharp. She was always sharp, even coming out of a severe episode which had surprised more than one nurse over the years. She asked who had called for help. The nurse did not know the name, just a man who had found her and stayed until the ambulance arrived. He had spoken to the paramedics, and then left without leaving his details. Nadia sat with that for a moment. Then she asked about her bag. The nurse told her it had been processed at intake and was in the storage room fully intact. They brought it to her within the hour. Nadia went through it methodically, the way she always went through it after an episode, checking everything against the mental inventory she kept. Her phone was there. Her work ID was there. Her monitor and supplies were there. She checked the inner lining of the main compartment, where a small seam opened to a flat pocket she had sewn herself 2 years ago. The kind of pocket that was not visible unless you knew it was there. It was empty. She sat very still. $200 had been in that pocket. Emergency cash she had put together slowly, $20 at a time, over the course of 4 months. Not savings exactly. More like a safety net she had built herself because she did not trust the idea of being caught without one. She had sewn it into her bag because she trusted the bag more than she trusted her own pockets. It was gone. She did not panic. Panic was not something Nadia did easily. She thought through it the way she thought through most problems, with a clear head and a systematic approach. The money had been there when she left her apartment. She had not accessed it. The bag had been out of her possession during the time between when she lost consciousness and when it was returned to her. Someone had gone through her bag. The paramedics would have gone through her bag looking for identification, but paramedics did not take cash. That was not something she could make herself believe, which left the window before the ambulance arrived, when the bag was on the ground beside her, and she was unconscious, and whoever had found her had been alone with her and her belongings. She asked the hospital if they had any information about the man who had called for help. They did not. Privacy protocol. The 911 log was a different department. Nadia spent 2 days making calls. She was polite on the phone. She was also extremely persistent. She explained the situation clearly and without embellishment. She did not accuse anyone on the phone. She simply asked for the name and workplace, if available, of the person who had placed the 911 call from East 9th Street on the morning in question. On the second day, a dispatcher who had clearly had a longer and more emotionally generous morning than most gave her a first name and a general area of employment, mentioned almost as an afterthought before she reminded Nadia that she was not technically supposed to share that. Nadia said thank you, she meant it. She found the rest herself. Marcus, warehouse floor manager, the industrial district east side. There were 3 warehouses in the right area. She went to the first 2 on her day off and asked for him by name. The second one was the right one. She walked in on a Wednesday morning. She was wearing her work clothes because she had taken half a day and was going in afterward. Her backpack was on her shoulder, the same worn canvas bag because it went everywhere with her. She asked the woman at the front desk if Marcus was available. The woman paged him. He came out from the back of the floor. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with a watchful quality to his eyes that she noticed before anything else. He looked at her without recognition, which made sense. He had found her face down on concrete. He had never seen her face properly. She recognized something in him, though, a specific kind of stillness, the kind that meant he was already bracing for what she was about to say before she said it. She told him her name. She told him she was the woman from East Ninth. She watched the recognition move through his expression, and with it, something that looked like relief, like he had wondered whether she was all right and was glad to see that she was. She gave that relief about 4 seconds before she cut through it. She told him about the money, about the pocket, about the fact that it was there when she left her apartment and gone when she got her bag back at the hospital. She told him that she was not there to make a scene. She was there because she wanted him to know that she knew, and because she was giving him the chance to return what he had taken before she took any further steps. She said it all in a flat, level voice that did not waver. She watched his face during all of it. He went still in a way that was different from the bracing stillness of before, quieter, heavier, like something had settled over him. He said 2 words. "I didn't." Not loudly, not angrily, not with the defensive rush of someone who has been caught and is scrambling. He said it the way someone says a thing that is simply true and does not know what else to add because the truth should be enough, and the fact that it is not enough is something they do not have a word for yet. She looked at him for a long moment. She did not believe him. She had reasons not to believe him. Reasons that were old and heavy, and had nothing to do with Marcus specifically, and everything to do with what she had learned about the particular way trust gets damaged when the person who hurts you is the same person who was supposed to be helping you. Those reasons lived in her body before they reached her brain. She could not simply set them aside because a man was speaking calmly. She left. She went to the police station that afternoon and filed a report. She was careful to state exactly what she could prove and nothing more. A sum of money had been in her bag. It was gone. The only person who had access to her bag during the relevant period was the individual who had found her. She gave his name and workplace. The officer who took the report was professional and non-committal. He said they would look into it. Nadia walked back to her car in the parking lot of the station and sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. She had done what made sense. She had followed the evidence to the most logical conclusion and acted on it. That was how she operated. That was how she had always operated. But sitting in that car, replaying the look on Marcus's face when he said, "I didn't," she felt something she did not particularly welcome. A small, inconvenient thread of doubt. She pushed it away. She started the engine. She drove to work and put in the remaining hours of her shift and did not think about his face again. That was what she told herself. The doubt, however, was not finished with her. It never really is, when it has something real to hold on to. And it did have something real, something small and stubborn and specific, something she had not mentioned to the officer because she had not yet decided what to do with it. The bag had been logged at hospital intake. She knew this because she had been given a form at discharge that listed the items recorded when her belongings were processed. The form was standard, meant to confirm that nothing had been lost or mixed up during care. The form was in her bag right now, folded into the front pocket. She had read it 4 times, and there was something on it that did not quite fit the conclusion she had arrived at, something small enough that she had almost dismissed it, something that the more she thought about it, the less easily she could set aside. She was going to have to look into it. She did not want to look into it. Looking into it meant she might find something that changed everything. And changing everything meant going back to that warehouse and standing in front of Marcus again with something much harder to carry than an accusation. The accusation had been clean, certain. It had given her somewhere to put the anger and the violation of knowing someone had gone through her things while she was helpless. The things she might find if she kept pulling the thread. That was going to be much more complicated. Marcus did not tell his sister what had happened. He thought about it on Sunday when she called, as she always did, at 11 in the morning. He was sitting at his kitchen table with a coffee going cold in front of him, and the specific kind of heaviness in his chest that had settled there since Wednesday, since the woman with the canvas backpack had walked into his workplace and said the things she said. Diane asked how his week had been. He said fine. She talked about her kids, about a situation at her job, about a neighbor who had started parking in her spot again. He listened. He responded in the right places. He did not say anything about the woman he had found, or the accusation, or the look on her face when she left. He told himself it was because there was nothing to say. He had told the truth. He would continue to tell the truth. The truth was a clean, simple thing that required no maintenance. He believed that. He had always believed that. He was about to spend the next 2 weeks learning how incomplete a belief it was. The investigator who contacted him was not unfriendly. She was a woman named Officer Pauline, matter-of-fact in the way that people in her line of work tend to become matter-of-fact about unpleasant tasks. She asked him to describe the morning in precise detail. He did. She asked if he had gone through the woman's bag at any point. He said no. She asked if he had seen anyone else near the bag before the ambulance arrived. He described the man with the dog who had come over briefly and then stepped back. She took the name. She said she would be in touch. He went back to work. Carl had heard something. Marcus could tell by the way Carl looked at him when he came back from the call, a look that was not accusatory but was also not entirely comfortable. Carl was a decent man who ran a decent operation and had no particular reason to protect Marcus and no particular reason to abandon him, which meant he was going to wait and see, which was a reasonable position and one that Marcus could not fault him for and did not particularly enjoy. His coworkers were harder to read. A few of them asked nothing and behaved normally, which was either loyalty or indifference, and Marcus could not always tell the difference. One of them, a man named Derek who Marcus had worked alongside for 3 years, made a joke about it that landed badly in the break room and apologized afterward, which Marcus accepted without making it a bigger moment than it needed to be. One of the women from the office side, Nina, gave him a look of such deliberate, visible sympathy every time she saw him that he started taking a longer route to the printer just to avoid it. He came home each evening and sat in his apartment and was quiet in the particular way that is different from chosen quiet. It was the quiet of someone who has run out of the right words for what they are carrying and has not yet found new ones. He called no one about it. He complained to no one. He went online and looked up nothing about the process or the timeline or what happened next. He simply continued to show up at work, do his job, come home, eat something, sleep, and start again. This was how Marcus had always moved through hard things, not by fighting them or talking them out or processing them in any of the ways that people with more outward emotional lives might, just by continuing to exist inside the difficulty until it was over. His sister called again the following Sunday. He still said nothing. He was not entirely sure why. Part of it was that telling Diane would mean she would worry, and worrying Diane meant a cascade of phone calls and opinions, and deeply loving but completely overwhelming involvement in his situation that he did not have the energy to manage on top of everything else. But part of it was something else, something he did not examine too closely. He was ashamed, not of anything he had done. He knew he had not done anything wrong. The shame was a different kind, the kind that does not require guilt to exist, the kind that comes simply from having your name attached to something ugly in front of people you see every day. It was the shame of being looked at sideways, of having your stillness read as guilt by people who did not know you well enough to read it right. It sat in him like a stone. During the second week, he started walking a different route to work, not because he was avoiding anything exactly, more because walking past the underpass on East 9th had taken on a quality he did not like. He would look at the spot where he had found her and feel something that was not quite regret and not quite anger, and had no comfortable name he could give it. He had turned around. He had turned around when he could have kept walking, when it would have been easy and reasonable and completely defensible to keep walking, and this was where turning around had brought him. He did not regret it. He refused to regret it, actually, with a quiet stubbornness that was one of his more reliable qualities. He would not allow himself to stand in his kitchen at 6 in the morning thinking that he should have kept walking. That was not the kind of man he was. But he was tired. He was tired of carrying something he had not put down and was not allowed to put down yet. Nadia, meanwhile, was pulling on the thread. She had gone back to the hospital on her next day off. She had gone to the administrative office and asked, as calmly and directly as she always asked things, to speak to someone about the intake process for her visit. She explained that there was a discrepancy she was trying to understand. The woman at the desk was initially cautious. Nadia was patient and persistent and did not raise her voice. After 20 minutes and 2 escalations, she was sitting across from a patient services coordinator named Helen, who had access to the intake log from the day Nadia had been brought in. Helen was helpful. She was also clearly uncomfortable with what the log showed once she had looked at it closely. The log showed that Nadia's bag had been processed at intake by a paramedic during the handoff. This was standard. What was not standard was a separate entry made approximately 14 minutes after the first, when a different staff member had logged additional contents from the bag into the lost and found system. 14 minutes, 2 separate entries, 2 different people. Nadia asked what the second entry contained. Helen hesitated. Nadia waited. Helen typed something, and then turned the screen slightly toward Nadia without saying anything. The second entry read, "Cash loose $200 found in bag lining, logged per protocol, patient name on envelope." Nadia read it twice. She sat back in the chair. Cash loose $200, found in bag lining, her hidden pocket, found not on the street, not by the man who had turned around and stayed and called for help, but here, in this building, by a staff member during intake who had followed protocol and logged it and put her name on the envelope and placed it in the lost and found, where it had been sitting for nearly 2 weeks. Unclaimed. Because she had not known to claim it, because she had not known it was there. Because she had looked at the intake form, seen the list of her belongings, and not seen cash listed, because the second entry had been logged by a different department and had not made it onto the form she had been given at discharge. The money had never left the hospital. It had never been taken. She walked down to the lost and found desk with Helen. She showed her ID. She signed a form. They gave her the envelope. She opened it. $200 in 20s and 10s. She stood at that desk for a moment, holding the envelope, while the specific weight of what she had done settled over her like something very slow and very heavy. She had walked into that man's workplace. She had said it flat like a verdict. She had filed a police report. She had put his name on a piece of official paper attached to something ugly. And he had stood there and said, "I didn't," in a voice that did not waver, and she had looked at him and not believed him. And he had been telling the truth. She drove home. She sat at her kitchen table. She thought about what came next for a very long time. Going back was not the easy thing. It would have been easier not to go back. To make a quiet call to the police station, correct the report, let the administrative machinery process the correction in its own time, and move on. She could argue that she had followed the evidence to a reasonable conclusion, that any reasonable person might have done the same, and that the correction of a mistaken report was sufficient. She could argue that. She sat at the table long enough that the afternoon light shifted, and her apartment went from bright to gold to the soft gray of early evening. Then she got up. She looked up the address of the warehouse on her phone. She noted that they opened at 7 in the morning. She would go Tuesday, her next day off. She would go back. Not because it was easy. Not because she had a script prepared. Not because she knew exactly what she was going to say or how she was going to say it or what she could possibly offer that would undo what had already been done. She would go back because a man had turned around when he did not have to, and she owed him the same. She arrived at the warehouse at 9 on a Tuesday morning. Early enough that the floor was already busy, but late enough that the arrival of one person at the front desk would not cause a ripple. She asked for Marcus. The same woman at the desk. She remembered Nadia. There was something careful in her face when she picked up the phone to page him, the particular carefulness of someone who had noticed the last time this woman showed up and what had happened afterward. Marcus came out from the back. He stopped when he saw her. He did not look angry. She had prepared herself for anger because anger would have been reasonable and would have been something she could work with, something with edges she could navigate. What was on his face was harder than anger. It was a kind of guarded exhaustion that she recognized from people who have been carrying something difficult for longer than they wanted to, and have decided to simply continue carrying it rather than put it down wrong. She said she needed to speak to him. She said it was important. She said she would understand if he did not want to, and that she would leave if he said so. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the back of the floor, and she understood that she was meant to follow. He led her to a side door that opened onto the loading area, a wide concrete apron behind the building with large roller doors and a few parked vehicles. It was loud from the street nearby, but private. No one was working in that section at the moment. He turned and faced her. She did not let herself build up to it. Building up to hard things was something she had learned not to do. Building up was just another form of protecting yourself from the weight of the words, and she owed him the full weight of them. She told him she had found the money. She told him where it had been. She told him about the hospital intake log, the second entry, the separate staff member, the lost and found envelope with her name on it. She told him what the form she received at discharge had not included. She told him all of it plainly and completely, watching his face as she spoke. His expression did not shift into triumph or relief the way she might have expected. It shifted into something quieter, something that looked almost like sadness, which was not what she had anticipated. When she finished, there was a silence. She did not fill it. She had learned the difference between silences that needed filling and silences that needed to be stood in. He looked out at the street beyond the loading dock. He said nothing for long enough that she almost spoke again. Then he said he knew she was going to say she was sorry, and that it was fine, and that he accepted it. She said that was not what she was going to say. He looked at her. She told him she was sorry. She said that first, because it needed to be said, and it needed to be said without conditions. She said it clearly and she meant it, every word of it. But then she said the thing she had come to say, the thing she had sat at her kitchen table working toward all through that gray evening. She said she knew it did not fix it. She said she knew that a correct report and a returned apology did not undo what the accusation had already done. That his name had been attached to something in front of people he worked with every day, and that names do not come fully clean even after the record is corrected. That she knew this because she had watched it happen to people she cared about, and she was not going to stand in front of him and pretend that her apology made everything even, because it did not. She said she was not asking him to say it was fine. She was asking him to know that she knew what she had done to him. He was looking at her with an expression she could not easily categorize. She kept going because she had started, and stopping halfway was worse than either finishing or not beginning. She told him why she had believed it so readily, not as an excuse. She said that word deliberately before she continued, not an excuse, an explanation. She told him that 2 years ago a man had helped her out of a difficult situation. She had trusted him for it, and in the time after that help, he had used that trust as a way into her life that she had not agreed to and had not wanted. He had used her gratitude as leverage. She had spent a long time afterward learning to be careful in ways she had not needed to be careful before. She told him this in the same flat, direct voice she used for everything. Her eyes stayed steady. She had decided they would. She was not telling him this so he would feel sorry for her. She was telling him because he deserved to know that what she had done to him had a specific shape, and the shape of it was not about him. And she wanted him to have that, to be able to separate what she had done from who he was, because those two things were not the same, and she needed him to know it. When she finished, the loading dock was very quiet. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she did not expect. He said he had almost kept walking. He said it simply, not like a confession, more like a fact he had decided she was entitled to have. He said that he had seen her, and he had looked at the time, and he had gotten 3 steps further down the street before he turned around. He said he did not know exactly why he had turned around. He said he had asked himself that question more than once over the past 2 weeks and had not arrived at a satisfying answer. She stood very still. He said he was not telling her that because he wanted her to feel a specific way about it. He said it because when she had told him the thing that had happened to her, the thing that had made her so ready to believe the worst, he felt like she deserved to know that he had not been particularly heroic either. That heroism was not what had made him turn around. That he was just a man who had been 3 steps away and had not been able to talk himself into continuing. She did not say anything for a moment. There were things moving in her chest, complicated and overlapping, and she did not try to name them because some things become smaller when you try to name them, and these felt like they needed room. She said she was glad he had not talked himself into continuing. He said he was too. Another silence, not uncomfortable, the kind that has weight in a different way, not heavy but full. She asked how things were at work, not making conversation, genuinely asking. He said it was quiet. He said people had been careful around him in the way people are careful around something they are not sure is fragile or not. He said it was not pleasant, but it was manageable. She nodded. She said she had already called the police station and given the full explanation before coming here. She said the report would be formally corrected, and she had made sure to be specific about the fact that the original accusation had been based on an error, and that he was entirely without fault. He said he appreciated that. She picked up her bag from where she had set it on the concrete. She said she was going to go. She said she had not come expecting anything from him and was not leaving expecting anything either. She said she just needed to have come. He said he understood that. She started to turn. He said her name, her first name. She had not given it to him here today, which meant he had remembered it from when she had introduced herself the first time, weeks ago, when she had come here to accuse him. She turned back. He said he hoped things got easier for her. She looked at him. She said the same. She walked out of the loading area, back through the side door, across the warehouse floor where the sounds of the working day carried on around her, past the woman at the front desk who was carefully not looking up, and out through the main entrance into the morning air. She stood on the pavement outside for a moment. The city carried on the way cities do, indifferent and continuous. People moved past her. Cars moved past. The sounds of ordinary life going forward in all its unremarkable directions. She breathed. Then she walked to her car, put her bag on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel. She was not okay in any clean or simple sense. What she had done had consequences she could not fully undo, and she knew it, and the knowing of it was something she was going to have to carry for a while. But she had gone back. She had stood in front of him and said the true things and not protected herself from the weight of them. That was what she could do. She had done it. She started the engine and pulled out into traffic. Behind her in the warehouse, Marcus stood at the loading dock for another minute before going back inside. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the street, not thinking about anything in particular, or maybe thinking about everything. It was hard to say. He had been carrying something heavy for 2 weeks. It was still there. It did not vanish because she had come back. A heavy thing does not vanish because the person who put it down apologizes for the weight. But something in it had shifted. Some part of it had changed shape. He went back inside. He picked up where he had left off. 6 weeks later, Marcus walked into a coffee shop on the corner of Delaney and 9th. It was a Saturday morning, mild and clear, and he had come because the coffee in his apartment had run out and he had not gotten to the store. He was standing at the counter, waiting for his order when he saw her. Nadia was at a small table near the window. She had her laptop open and a drink in front of her and her canvas backpack hooked over the back of the chair. She was reading something on the screen and had not seen him come in. He saw her a full 10 seconds before she looked up. In those 10 seconds, he did not move toward her table and did not look away. He just stood at the counter in the ordinary noise of a Saturday morning coffee shop and looked at her for a moment. This woman he had found on concrete 6 weeks ago and sat beside until help came and then forgotten, and then not been able to forget. This woman who had walked into his workplace and said a thing that had taken 2 weeks of his life. This woman who had walked back into his workplace and said other things that had given some of those 2 weeks back. She looked up. Their eyes met across the coffee shop. There was a beat, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3. In that beat there was no conversation, no script, no rehearsed moment. Just 2 people on a Saturday morning in a city going about its business, recognizing each other across a room and not quite knowing what to do with that recognition. He nodded. She nodded. That was all. He took his coffee when the barista called his name. He found a seat on the other side of the shop, near the wall, not across the room from her but not at her table. He opened his phone. He drank his coffee. She closed her laptop after a while and packed up. She looped her bag onto her shoulder. She walked past his table on her way to the door. She paused not long, a moment. She said, "Take care of yourself." 3 words, quiet, real. He said the same. She walked out. He sat with his coffee for another few minutes. Outside, the city moved the way it always moved, forward and indifferent and full of people carrying things that other people could not see. A man who had turned around once. A woman who had gone back. A long thread of consequence between those 2 decisions that had wound through accusations and investigations and quiet weeks of carrying and a loading dock conversation and a lost and found envelope and $200 in 20s and 10s. None of it had resolved into anything neat. Life rarely does. What it had resolved into was this: 2 people who had met in the worst possible circumstances and had, despite everything, managed to see each other clearly by the end of it. Not perfectly, not without cost, but clearly. He finished his coffee. He got up, put the cup in the bin by the door, and stepped out into the Saturday morning. He walked home. On the way, he passed the underpass on East 9th. He looked at the spot. He kept walking.